YouTube, Awesome Rider here. Welcome to my review for Kamen Rider Zeztz Episode 4. Even though this is Episode 4, it felt more like an Episode 3. I think it was said somewhere. I don't know if this was like an official statement or a fan speculation. Maybe it's both. But the idea that the first 3 episodes was more of the pilot, and that makes sense because that was very much about setting the status quo in a 3-parter. I still wish that you could air that just all in one and have a big epic 2 or 3-parter, but we can't really do things like that the way Toku's aired. But it does feel like that in the sense that this definitely felt like the first episode after you set your status quo. Whether you have 1 episode, 2 episodes, you always have that one that's kind of like the first Monster of the Week case that feels more like what day-to-day in the series is going to feel like, and that's what this felt like. The only real negative I have in this episode was that it was very much a part 1, so I don't have a whole lot more to say. Like, there was good stuff, and I do have stuff to talk about, but I feel like I don't have as much to say as the last few episodes because it's kind of very much that classic part 1 situation. The first thing I wanted to talk about, first order of business, before we talk about anything, is that weird little cowlick thing his hair does. First of all, I didn't realize it was meant to be a nod to him sleeping, or so I thought. It reminds me of something else, and I can't remember whether it was Deno or like Revice when a character's possessed and they had like a weird hair thing. Maybe I'm just misremembering it, but it just reminds me of another case where like a character's possessed by somebody and they have like a very weird specific like 1-2 strands of hair cowlick going up, and I just wanted to mention that before I forgot it. So in this episode, you have the case of the week is protect the VIP bride or whatever it is. And I don't think it's the same church, but the church just kept reminding me of the Boom Boonjer pilot. I know we've done a bunch of Toku wedding episodes, especially in Sentai, that's one of the staple episodes, but it just, maybe because it's recent, it was reminding me of the Boom Boonjer wedding stuff. But he's trying to figure out who is a dreamer, basically. It just reminded me of Twin Peaks, you know, who is the dreamer? I had another Monica Bellucci dream. That's kind of the way these are gonna go, is he'll enter a dream with different characters and he'll have to figure out who the dreamer is. And you kind of have that classic situation you've seen in probably rom-coms or TV shows where you have like this will they, won't they best friend situation, but then the girl's getting married or the guy's getting married and, you know, the best friend doesn't want it to happen. And you initially assume that it's the guy dreaming of stopping the wedding, but it's the girl that did it. I kind of called that early on just because it felt like that in this scene when she's talking to her friend or whoever it was in front of the mirror. It felt like she didn't want to do this wedding thing. But the best thing about this episode for me was it did kind of address my concern from last week. I'll still be curious to see how this plays out as the series goes. But I talked about how last week I thought that they kind of rushed this idea that he's more confident in the dream and not as confident in the real world, and it seemed like there really wasn't any difference, really, and I thought it would be interesting to have him be weaker in the real world and have to gain confidence and slowly transfer his skills. And like I said, I'll be curious to see how they play that over time, but they did address that here, even though, in my opinion, he didn't show it in Episode 3's fight. In this episode, he did say that he felt more scared when he fought in the real world, which was a nice little touch. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think it's a nice character beat, and I hope they continue to follow up on it. I also like the little detail that he's trying to get physically fit in the real world to prepare for when the fights come there. I think that's just a nice little addition that kind of just enhances what I already really like about this dynamic. There was also an inverse of that when he's trying to figure out who the dreamer is and he does this little investigation and he's kind of surprised at how well he's doing, and Zero says to him, you know, you've been a detective in your dreams for years, some of those skills are now transferring. I really like that. I hope there's more moments like that. I still wish it had been more built up to, because like I said last week, it seemed like even though he said he was scared, it didn't seem like he was struggling to fight. I think it would have been cool for like a 5-10 episode arc to see him gradually get more skilled in the real world, but I really like that they addressed that. It was almost like an immediate response, especially the idea of him even saying, I felt more scared in the real world because I didn't know if I had my skills and the stakes were different, and I really like that. I'm really glad that they addressed that here. Also, speaking of the investigation, we did get the introduction of basically his memory gadgets. They aren't little animal buddies, but they're the little gadgets he uses, and I really like that. I've said in the past that that's one thing I wouldn't mind seeing every year if possible, just because I think it's fun to see what they come up with, is what type of memory gadgets, quote unquote, that they would come up with. But I thought that was fun. You know, they fit into the show rather well, and the show so far is doing a good job, I think, of, like I said in the past few weeks, of, I think, putting its best foot forward to try to gain new audiences, but like we as older fans can see like, oh, this is when they're advertising the gadgets, or this is when they're advertising the capsums. And speaking of, I continue to enjoy the pacing. It looks like next episode will be our first new form. Episode 5, I think that's perfect. I like that they've taken this time to sort of, they show off the way the capsums work, and that works with like having the wing ability and stuff and all that, and I think it's a cool way of showing like, hey, here's the belt and the toys and how it works, do you want to buy it, without feeling so in your face with like, look, here's a new form, kids. and it does it in a way that fits into kind of the pilot beginning series sensibilities, and I really enjoy how they've done that so far. And now I'm actually excited to get a new form. I think 5 episodes is fairly perfect for that. I'll be curious to see if we shotgun them after that and we get one every episode. I kind of like the way, I think Gab did it this way, and that's my favorite way to do it when you do stuff like auxiliary Zords or like their early power-ups, is to have one episode in between, so you have like their debut episode and then you have one episode for them to sort of shine. I've talked about this in the past, but Gotchard did it so weird where they would debut a new form, but then it would be the last form they got that got the finishing move. It was so strange. I'm all for like original pacing and stuff, but that just felt like it buried the forms and made them like not as memorable. So I really like the pacing of the way they've done that here with this, with having us introduce us the abilities and the capsules through the suit abilities rather than just shotgunning forms really quick. Also, when we're doing the investigation stuff and we start involving our Mulder and Scully, I really liked this one scene in particular where you have Baku in the dream world in the church, and then you have them seeing the feathers in the real world, the Mulder and Scully. You know, I forget their names at the moment. I'll learn it eventually, probably, but for now they're Mulder and Scully. At least they're not Phil. But that was really cool. That was a really neat scene, and I really like in general about the series the idea of investigating and fighting and weaving in and out through the real and dream worlds. I think that brings a lot of like storytelling possibility, and I love the way that the fights in the dream world are more heightened with different possibilities of like the monster being able to just like throw the pews at him and stuff and like warp the world, like Inception stuff. I really do like that stuff a lot. I also thought it was an interesting revelation that we had, that because the nightmare made it into the world briefly last week, it opened up people to more nightmares. I think that was a cool way of showing a purpose behind that, because I said last week, I'm like, I wish that would have been built up to also. Like, that's kind of a huge consequence, but it also did a good job of showing the consequences of what could happen. And I don't think it was needed to explain why there would be more nightmares, but I think it's kind of an added stakes thing. So like maybe every time one breaks through even briefly, like things get even worse and you have more opportunities for nightmares to get through. But yeah, I'm still really digging the show. I'm finally starting to get into the groove of thinking of it as the main show in my head, just because I'm like so used to Gav, and also the watching schedule is so different. But they've been really impressing me so far, and I'm really glad this week kind of quelled my fears that I had last week about handling the protagonist, because I really do like our lead. I find him very likable, and this week reminded me from the first couple episodes what I liked about the idea of him having 2 different personas and benefiting from that. I just hope they stick the landing with that, and it does make him feel more different than your classic protagonist. Like last week sort of stumbled a little bit with that, but I hope they stick with what they're doing here. But what did you guys think of the episode? Let me know in the comments as always. Till next time, Dawson Rider signing out.